After 3 years of marriage, Mark and Kelly decided it was time to move out of their little downtown apartment. They desired a more tranquil setting where they could establish a life together, a house. The house they discovered fulfilled all of their fantasies. It was charming and reasonably priced, tucked away in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and had a little garden that Kelly instantly saw flowering. Mark adored the attic, which he believed could be converted into a comfortable workspace. In order to live with her family, the previous owner, an elderly woman, had downsized. Eager for a fresh start, she left the property tidy and vacant. Life was lovely during the first few weeks. They spent the days decorating, unpacking, and planning their future. They were lulled to sleep at night by the chirping of crickets outside their window. However, the house soon started to feel strange. Little things like lights flickering, doors that Kelly was certain she had closed remaining open, and that subtle, peculiar creaking in the ceiling at odd hours were the first signs. Mark initially brushed it off. According to him, houses settle. There is no need for concern. They both heard a distinct set of footsteps coming from the attic one evening while they were watching TV in the living room. Mark's face became white as he turned to face Kelly. "It's most likely a squirrel, or a raccoon. I will investigate it tomorrow." However, tomorrow became the following week. The nighttime rustling above their bedroom, the sporadic thuds, and once the sound of something rolling over the attic floor were all sounds that were harder to ignore. Mark could see the uneasiness beneath Kelly's laughter as she joked that the place was haunted. On a Saturday night, Mark was in the garage and Kelly was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Behind her, she heard a slight sound that sounded like breathing. There was nobody around when she turned, but the pantry door was ajar. She explained the situation to Mark when he entered the house. "I'm not insane," she said. "That door was closed." Despite his best efforts to soothe her, Mark was unable to ignore her mounting anxiety. They heard it again as they lay in bed that night, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing above their heads. Mark was no longer able to ignore it. "That isn't an animal," he whispered. Getting out of bed, he picked up a flashlight and made his way to the attic entrance. Kelly grabbed his arm and followed. The attic hatch, a straightforward panel with a pull-down ladder, was located in the hallway ceiling. The ladder groaned down as Mark pulled on the cord. "Perhaps we should call someone instead," Kelly muttered. Mark gave a headshake. "I'll handle it if it's an animal. Otherwise, we'll work things out." It was musty and dark in the attic. Mark's flashlight beam skimmed across insulation and weathered wooden beams. It appeared to be vacant at first. But then he smelled it, putrid and foul. As he descended farther, he caught sight of it. A dirty heap of blankets and discarded clothing served as a makeshift bed in the far corner of the attic. It was surrounded by plastic bottles, crumpled wrappers, and empty food cans. Notes in ragged handwriting were scribbled on the wooden beams. Mark took a step forward and read one. "They are unaware of my presence." His blood froze. He said in a raspy voice, "Kelly, call the police." His flashlight beam detected movement in the darkness as he turned to go. In the corner was a crouching figure. The man had matted hair, a grimy face, and wild, unblinking eyes that sparkled. His lips twisted into a smile that chilled Mark's spine, and he was thin, almost skeletal. The man leaped to his feet before Mark could move. Mark yelled for Kelly to flee as he clambered down the ladder. Until the cops showed there, they locked themselves in the bedroom. The individual was gone when the authorities examined the attic, but they discovered proof that he had been residing there for several months. The most terrifying aspect? The hall closet was accessible through a tiny opening in the attic floor. According to the smudged fingerprints on the inside of their bedroom door, the man had been entering the house when they were sleeping, stealing food, and monitoring them. The following day, Mark and Kelly moved out. They couldn't get rid of the feeling that they were being watched, though, even in their new apartment. During the night, Mark would awaken, certain that he had heard a creak outside the bedroom door. Kelly claimed to have seen shadows shift in the room's corners. Never again did they feel secure. They understood that the man had never sought their food or refuge. He was pursuing them. And he's still waiting for his next family to move in, someplace, in a dark attic. Olivia and her younger brother Ethan felt the ancient Victorian house was a great deal when they moved there. The inheritance was insufficient to support their modest city flat after their parents died in a vehicle accident not long ago. It seemed fate then, when they discovered the big country home listed for half its market value. The mansion had a haunting beauty of its own. It featured elaborate moldings, groaning wooden flooring, and tall, arched windows. Ethan, at 17, couldn't care less as long as he had his own place, but Olivia, ever the romantic, adored the vintage charm. Despite their distance, the neighbors were friendly. When Olivia introduced herself, they were apprehensive, and their grins wavered when she brought up the mansion. Before leaving, an elderly man down the street even remarked, "You're braver than most." Olivia sipped a bottle of wine in the living room on their first night together, taking in the peace and quiet of the countryside. Ethan was unpacking upstairs. She heard it, a faint whisper, as she gazed into the roaring fire. She thought it might be the wind because it was so soft. Her heart pounded in her chest as she leaned forward. "Go." There was no mistaking the word. Olivia's breath stuck in her throat as she froze. Nothing seemed out of place when she looked around the room. The elaborate wallpaper was shadowed by the flickering flames. She made an effort to dismiss it, blaming it on her imagination and the strain of the relocation. The following morning, Ethan appeared agitated. During breakfast, he inquired, "Did you hear anything strange last night?" "What's strange?" Olivia tried to seem informal as she asked. "I'm not sure." "Such as voices?" With his fork hanging above his plate, Ethan paused. "It sounded like someone was whispering outside my door." Olivia forced a smile. "The house is old. It's probably just the wind." Despite his lack of conviction, Ethan ended the conversation. The whispers increased in frequency over the course of the following few days. They would begin softly, hardly perceptible, and then intensify into whispered discussions that seemed to reverberate throughout the home. The tone was clear, angry, urgent warning, but Olivia was never able to fully understand the words. After hearing someone, or something, call his name in the middle of the night, Ethan refused to sleep in his room. The door was secured as they slept, and Olivia carried his mattress into her room. Olivia made the decision to face the source of the noises one evening. The firelight flickered across her resolute face as she stood in the living room. "Show yourself if someone is here," she made a demand. There was silence for a minute. Then, with its crystals clinking softly, the chandelier above her started to wobble. The fire was put out when a chilly air blew through the room. Then she heard it, as plain as day. "Leave. Right now." Olivia started looking into the history of the house they had recently moved into, terrified but afraid to leave. She rummaged through newspaper clippings and old records for hours at the local library. She learned that the Cromwells, a rich family, had constructed the home in the late 19th century. But in 1903, tragedy struck when Edgar Cromwell, the father, lost his mind and killed his wife and 3 children before ending his own life. The mansion had been sold and resold over the years, with each new owner unexpectedly departing within months, claiming the house was haunted. At least Olivia had never believed in ghosts. However, it was difficult to ignore the cold places, the whispers, and the unsettling sense of being watched. She made the decision to get in touch with one of the former owners. She dug a little deeper and discovered Mrs. Hargrove, an old woman who had resided in the house for 20 years. Olivia contacted her, and after a long period of silence, the woman said, "You have to get out of there. It's not secure." "What do you mean?" Olivia pushed. With a quivering voice, Mrs. Hargrove stated, "It doesn't want you there. The house feeds off your anxiety. It grows stronger the more you fear it." The woman hung up before Olivia could ask any more questions. The whispers became screams that night. The home appeared to come alive as Olivia and Ethan cuddled in her bed. The temperature dropped, windows rattled, and doors banged. Olivia heard a harsh, guttural voice growling her name at midnight. She took hold of Ethan's hand. "We're heading out. Right now." However, the front door remained in place when they attempted to escape. They were trapped inside when the locks turned on their own. A dark, viscous liquid started to seep from the crevices in the walls. Each voice overlaying the others, the whispers turned into a deafening cacophony. "Go! You're not welcome here! Go!" Olivia grabbed a large chair and smashed it through the window while she yelled. The frigid night air surged in when the glass broke. She crawled out of the window and into the yard, pulling Ethan along with her. Olivia looked back at the home as they dashed to the car. A shadowy creature with bright eyes penetrating the darkness stood in the attic window, watching them. Ethan and Olivia never came back to the house. Before locating a new residence, they spent a week in a motel. Olivia drove past the boarded-up and deserted old Victorian house months later. She insisted that she could still hear the faint but persistent murmurs calling her back as she gazed at it. However, she continued. She also never turned around again. Henry and his wife, Susan, finally bought a house they could call their own after years of renting. It was a calm neighborhood with lots of trees and an older Victorian-style home. It had character, as the realtor had put it, which they soon discovered was code for oddities like drafty windows, creaking floorboards, and strange nighttime noises. Unpacking, setting in, and small modifications took up the first few weeks. While organizing the basement on a soggy Saturday afternoon, Henry discovered something strange. A tiny wooden door, painted the same shade as the wall, stood behind a pile of dusty boxes. He had almost missed it since it was so subtle. He yelled out, "Susan!" She wiped her hands on a towel and joined him. "Observe this. Was there anything regarding a room down here mentioned by the realtor?" Susan scowled. "No, however it is most likely merely a utility closet or something like. Have you attempted to open it?" Henry gave a headshake. The door featured a tiny, corroded keyhole but no knob. He was intrigued and walked upstairs to the junk drawer, where he recalled finding a variety of old keys that had been left behind by the previous owner. One of them was a wonderful match. With a creak, the door opened to expose a little path that descended deeper into the earth. There was a slight earthy odor. "That's disturbing," Susan remarked, looking into the shadows. With a flashlight in hand, Henry answered, "Probably just more storage." He went down into the passage over Susan's objections. A tiny room with stone walls was reached by the steps. Compared to the rest of the basement, it was considerably colder. An old wooden chair stood in the middle, facing the distant wall, which was covered in weird, childish paintings of homes, grotesque stick figures, and menacing-looking forms with big, vacant eyes. "Henry?" Susan's voice reverberated softly. Unwilling to go down, she stood at the top of the stairs. With a shiver running up his spine, Henry yelled back, "There's something weird down here." He moved toward the wall and illuminated the artwork with the flashlight. One word was written repeatedly beneath the sloppy artwork. "Stay out of the dark." There was a shuffling noise behind him. With the bright beam piercing the darkness, Henry whirled around. Except for the chair, which was now facing him, the room was deserted. Henry was unable to get rid of the eerie vibe from the basement that night. Henry wanted to look into it more since he was certain there was a reasonable explanation, but Susan urged they hire a contractor to close off the door. He informed her, "It's just an old house. I think we're overanalyzing it." Susan heard faint whispering when she woke up that night. She pushed Henry to wakefulness. "Hear that?" she said in a whisper. Henry paid attention. The quiet ticking of the clock was the only sound in the home. He muttered, "It's probably the wind," and rolled over. But from beneath the floorboards, the murmurs became louder. As they both listened in horror, Susan held Henry close. Although the voices were not clear, the tone was one of desperation and imploring. Then there were footsteps in the basement, slow and deliberate. With Susan at his heels, Henry picked up a baseball bat and walked gingerly downstairs. The secret room's door stood open. They left a flashlight on the downstairs counter, and it flickered feebly. The murmurs ceased suddenly as Henry got closer, and a harsh, guttural growl took their place. He pushed a large bookcase in front of the door and slammed it shut. They got in touch with a local historian who focused on the older houses in the region the following day. His expression darkened as they told him about their discovery. He started by saying, "This house, it has a dark history. A man by the name of Charles Greaves resided here in the late 19th century. He was a solitary artist who collaborated with kids from the nearby orphanage. People believed him to be harmless yet quirky. Until the kids started to vanish, that is." Susan's face turned white. "What took place?" After a while, police learned that Charles had been employing the kids in a ritualistic artistic endeavor. He would entice them to his secret chamber and... The historian paused. "Let's just say that things didn't work out for them. Despite the fact that the house has been sold multiple times since, each family departs after encountering odd happenings." Horror set in as Henry and Susan looked at one another. The whispers resurfaced that night, louder and more persistent. Neither had touched the huge bookcase that blocked the door, but it had been shoved aside. The black passageway was visible through the wide open door. Susan pleaded with Henry to go, but the house's lights flickered and went out before they could. A shiver of cold ran through the air. They could hear deliberate, unhurried footsteps coming up from the basement. Susan refused to move as Henry seized her and dragged her to the front door. At the top of the basement stairs, a black creature appeared, its face hidden by darkness, its limbs stretched, its form humanoid but incorrect. "Stay out of the dark!" was screamed by a cacophony of voices as the whispers became unbearable. The house was quiet by dawn. When the neighbor saw that the couple had forgotten their newspaper, she called the police. Except for the basement, where the secret room had mysteriously sealed itself, the house was deserted when the authorities arrived. The rudimentary sketches on the wall now featured two additional characters, a man and a woman, their features contorted in fear, but no trace of Henry or Susan was ever discovered. To this day, the house has not been sold. On some evenings, if you happen to go by, locals claim that you can hear faint voices coming from the basement, begging to be released.